And welcome back to the Hot Lap. What on earth is going on with Mercedes? If you were pretty much reading, well, the F1 equivalent tabloids, it's disaster. Their Mercedes have no hope. They're the slowest car ever. Okay, it's not quite that disaster, I think, but there's quite a few measured articles out there which I really I'd like to share with you and I want to get into. But Mercedes, as we know, did not have a good Brazilian Grand Prix. They had a much better Brazilian Grand Prix last year, which we'll get into again. However, let me just quickly transition. As you can see behind me, I will quickly, magically disappear. There's my friend Toto Wolff. There we go. There he is. There's my friend Toto Wolff. And this was him on Sky, which I thought was an interesting few quotes we've collected. Not the whole interview, obviously, but here we go. Yeah, take a listen to this.
Inexcusable performance. There's even no words for that. That car finished second last week and the week before, and whatever we did to it was horrible. Lewis survived out there, but George, I can only feel for the two driving such a miserable thing. So it shows how difficult the car is. It's on the knife's edge. We got to develop that better for next year, because it can't be that within 7 days you're finishing on the podium, solid, quickest car, probably one of the two quickest cars, and then you're nowhere and finish eighth. I think we need to push for the last two races and recover. I think that's the most important thing. And see what we can do in Las Vegas, totally different track, and Abu Dhabi. But the performance today was, I'm lacking words. I think straight line speed was one issue, but probably not the main factor. The main factor was that we couldn't go around the corners with the bigger wing, with the pace we needed, and we were killing the tires, just eating them up within a few laps.
And that was, well, I'd like to say my dear friend Toto Wolff, but no, he's not a dear friend. I don't even know the guy, but I felt so sorry. I felt so sorry for the guy. I mean, he's sitting there. He's obviously believes he's done his job in relation to the team, and he kind of, well, he's the boss. He has to take the flak, doesn't he? But he must feel like, to a certain extent, he's completely let the side. He's let Lewis and George Russell down, their drivers. And, this is Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, who has re-signed with your team, who is in rumours, in talks with other teams. Yes, I don't really think they're that serious. But still, poor Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff. I mean, and George Russell, they can't seem to get a break. And I'm sure the team are working really hard. No team wants to make a bad car, do they? So let's get into this. I mean, we kind of skipped across it the other day. Wolff, unacceptable Brazilian Grand Prix, my worst weekend in F1. This is by Jonathan Noble from motorsport.com, as you can see. But as you can see, everyone absolutely lambasting, going crazy about Mercedes. And we have to remember, this is one race. Now, Mercedes boss Wolff has labelled the unacceptable Brazilian Grand Prix weekend as his worst in his Formula One team. Now, before we continue to read the article, I think part of that reason is because Mercedes came in to this race weekend thinking they had a shot at winning the Grand Prix. Their pace in Qatar was very solid. Their pace in Toto was very solid, albeit the disqualification. And their pace in Mexico was quite solid as well. No Max Verstappen pace. I think Lando Norris was quite impressive, but still, it wasn't the worst in the world at all. It was fairly solid. And winning last year at Brazil, naturally they thought, this is going to suit our car. We should do quite well at Brazil this year. And it was an unfortunate truth that showed Mercedes up. So, and it says, off the back of competitive showing in the US and Mexico and returning to their scene of last year's triumph, they'd hoped for another strong outing. Makes sense. But it endured one of its least competitive weekends of the year. Lewis and George struggling for speed. They said Russell managed fourth in the sprint before retiring in the Grand Prix, while Hamilton grabbed the seventh and an eighth on Sunday. But he was more than 1 minute behind. And obviously finishing behind McLaren, Stroll passed him and AlphaTauri passed him. And Wolf says the lack of performance shown over the weekend was confusing and not something that the squad could simply brush off. He said swings are on, but swings are not on from being almost quickest to being wherever we ended up, 8th. He said, for me personally, the worst weekend in 13 years. Totally baffling, at the same time unacceptable for all of us. We are a proper structure, solid team that didn't work like a solid team. Within 3 consecutive races, you're finishing a strong second. I just swore at the camera, I mean second, number 2. And both of them challenging Max. And then a week later, you're ending up nowhere. Believe this is just not on. Absolutely it's not. Now there's talk about the ride height too high. Mercedes said there was no simple answer for why it was so badly off the pace in Brazil, but Wolff did admit that it had been far too conservative with its ride height, which could have played a factor. In the wake of Hamilton's disqualification from second place in Austin for excessive plank wear, the team appears to have sacrificed more than it needed to in Brazil to ensure there were no legality issues, which was interesting because Toto said, I'd risk it again, the ride height issue to win a race. Okay. He said, we ran the car too high, but that wasn't the main reason for an absolute off weekend in terms of performance, added Wolff. There's something fundamentally wrong, mechanically rather. It's not a rear wing and it's not the car being slightly too high because we're talking a millimetre or two. That is performance, but that isn't the explanation for a total off. The pain of the Brazilian Grand Prix is especially confusing because Mercedes came just 1 year after. Came just 1 year after the team delivered the perfect setup to allow Russell to win. However, the caveat there is potentially that was a perfect storm in relation to the fact that it was a sprint weekend and other teams maybe did what Mercedes did this weekend, just completely struggled to get the setup right. Now, this is from the race.com, our verdict on Mercedes' miserable Grand Prix slump, which is they've been quite damning about Mercedes, but there's some really good journalists down at the race that make some really interesting points I'd like to mention. Scott Mitchell has basically said it had better just be a setup mistake, which I think any Mercedes, Hamilton and George Russell fan are absolutely crossing their fingers for. He said this shows the reality of how bad a car is capable of being, how far Mercedes may still have to go in understanding things, and how easy it is to get wrong on a sprint weekend. Mercedes needs the winter to make bigger car changes across the board. That was always going to put a hard limit on what it could achieve for the final races of 2023. And maybe Brazil was just a harsh example of how weak and even improved W14 can be. And he talks about the dramatic step backward from just, a fortnight ago. Glenn Freeman has put on the race, at least Brazil won't give it false hope this year. It says, we've heard quite a lot about how winning in Brazil a year ago gave Mercedes false hope that its unique car concept had more potential than turned out to be the case. At least there's no danger of history repeating itself. And it's interesting that they mentioned that. And we mentioned the perfect storm because let's just go from the race to Autosport. This is from Philip Green on the 11th of April 2023 this year. And it says Mercedes' crippling 22 porpoising issues are well documented. The team was unable to run the W13 as low as it wanted to extract its ultimate performance, it says. But over the second half of the year, Hamilton and Russell became more and more competitive. Now, certainly the pair had grabbed a fair share of podiums, but they were often helped by reliability issues for one of the Ferraris. But it said in Mexico, Russell and Hamilton outqualified Perez and both Ferraris. There were signs that Mercedes were starting to turn the ship around, and a win for Russell, a 1-2, essentially. If you remember last year, Adam Hamilton appeared to show its unique concept was coming good. And according to Toto Wolff, the late upturn in form caused a perfect storm, which convinced the team to stick to its guns for 2023 and persist with that W14 similar concept. And as we know, it was only in the season's opener in Bahrain where we all saw that may well have been a mistake. Oh, Mercedes. I mean, let's look at this is this year's Brazilian Grand Prix where Let me see. Fastest. We'll get into fastest laps. Yeah, let's have a look at the fastest laps. This is this year's. Lando Norris won 12.486. Bearing in mind, caveat being, yes, there are people on different tyres. Verstappen a 113.4. Ricciardo a 113.8. Now, if we go to, and Hamilton is all the way down in 12th, a 114.7. I mean, average, that's just absolutely crazy. Where's Russell? Is Russell there at all? Yeah, 114.9. Now, if you go to last year's results, this is last year's results in Brazil. We've got obviously, no, that's not last year's, that's this year's. Give me 2 secs. Let's look at last year's result in Brazil, shall we? So we've got, if we scroll all the way down here to the Brazilian Grand Prix, we've got Russell winning. And obviously Hamilton second. This time Hamilton finished 60 seconds behind the winner, which was Verstappen. Here he finished a good, 8.5 seconds ahead. But significantly, when you look at fastest laps, Russell managed a 113.7, Hamilton a 113.9. So a car that's a year, a newer car with 1 year of development, and they didn't get anywhere close to matching the fastest lap. I mean, like nearly a second off, 114.7. And a 113.9. That's 0.8 off for Lewis Hamilton. That's really significant, isn't it? Back to the race though. Mercedes looked asleep from Gary Anderson. It said during the race live hub Brazilian coverage, I asked, is the Mercedes pit box asleep? That was after Carlos was allowed to steam past both Russell and Hamilton. I stick by that comment. The car was not quick enough. It was using its tyres quicker than the others, and the team was not reacting to situations. A team of Mercedes standing should be able to pull something out on race day. Yeah, completely agree. They, maybe a 3-stop was suggested, I think, by Martin Brundle, but it's, on Formula1.com, once again, Wolf, inexcusable, miserable. The car doesn't deserve a win. We spoke about that yesterday. George Russell has given a damning verdict as well on PlanetF1.com. Russell looks set to only barely scrape a points finish, even if he'd made it to the end of the race as his car retired. He fell down to 9th and was being eyed up by both Ocon and Tsunoda at the time of his retirement, with Lewis Hamilton not faring much better, it says. Yeah, having come to Brazil full of optimism, Russell said, clearly we got something wrong this weekend. We're still not sure what this is as yet. He mused to Sky. The pace just hasn't been there. We thought yesterday was a one-off, but clearly it wasn't. They do talk about the ride height though, which I thought was quite interesting. If we skip over to here, and now what do you mean about the ride heights? Craig Scarborough's got quite interesting speed increases. Give me 2 seconds. So what is the ride height? Well, the ride height is the clearance of the car, as you can see, the height of the clearance of the car that has between the bottom of the car and the road. The ride height, it's got an impact on the car's centre of gravity, and thus its behaviour when cornering and braking. And it's basically any shift in weight, because there's a great amount of aerodynamic downforce, that's the car being pressed to the ground for more grip, is created by the F1 car's underbody. Ride height is also important for overall grip created by aero, and it's well known that the underbody aerodynamics are very sensitive to the ride height, as you mentioned, Toto Wolff. And now there are good reasons for reducing the ride height. In general, it's pretty much known that lowering this ride height will bring the centre of gravity of the car lower, making the car more responsive by decreasing the body roll, because the weight of the car is now lower. Also, downforce created by a lower F1 car is greater. It sucks onto that track more. Raising the ride height will have the opposite effect, which will increase body roll. That's basically a really general version of the ride height problem. And as Toto Wolff pretty much said, they did have an increased ride height, and I do feel that, and the rear end completely destroyed their tyres. What may not have helped either is the fact that it was quite a green track because of all that rain on Friday as well. It was fairly green, and the track wasn't maybe as embedded in, but these are just looking for excuses. But here's the interesting thing: is there hope? As I'm standing in front of Toto Wolff, is there hope for Mercedes? I honestly believe that there is. It's good that they've understood Well, it'll be really interesting to see at the next two races, which are quite different to each other. You've got the Las Vegas Grand Prix and Abu Dhabi. If they're strong there, this may well have been a one-off. And the hope is there. Brazil last year was pretty much a one-off for Red Bull in terms of they were just completely off the pace. And like Mercedes this year, their tyres completely went. Their tyres were going as well, even in the sprint race when George Russell passed Max Verstappen. What's the other bit of hope? Well, you look at over the winter how well Aston Martin did. They have the same power unit as Mercedes. So Aston Martin made a massive upturn in performance. Do you want more hope? Okay, I'll give it to you. More hope, McLaren. Look at McLaren. Arguably the second fastest car at the moment. The second best team. And, you know, Oscar Piastri's not doing too bad, but you've got to look to Lando Norris as well. And you have to start to wonder why, in a way, that Mercedes couldn't make the big, massive speed impact, whatever you want to call it, from the first race to now. They have really, really progressed that car. Their car has got so much faster. So if McLaren can do it, so can Mercedes. And I'd argue at this point, Mercedes may have more tools. You know, also have the capability of doing it. They are a world championship team. But as Hamilton said earlier this year, they have to be honest with themselves and do not go down a route kind of like that leads them down a blind alley, which potentially this zero pod design may well have done. I mean, you know, Mike Elliott, I believe he's now left the team, and I don't really think he was the scapegoat, but potentially he was one of the reasons why. No team, I mean, you just look to Red Bull, that Adrian Newey, one man, yeah, I guess he can make a difference, but we can't forget that there is an entire F1 team behind that one man. So without that F1 team behind Adrian Newey, that Red Bull would not be as good. And you could say the same for Mercedes, especially from 2014 onwards. I mean, they are still second in the Constructors' Championship. I think they'll come back. I do not think they'll be the fourth or fifth slowest car in Las Vegas. It's kind of like a nice reset in a way, because no teams know what the setup's going to be for that race. So I do feel there's a lot of hope for Mercedes going forward. I'll have my fingers crossed. We'll find out in 2 weeks' time, and then we'll find out again in a week's time after that. So in 3 weeks, I think we'll have our answer as to how bad this Mercedes problem is. I think it's been over-egged. I think people are panicking far too much. I think Mercedes is going to be okay. So, this has been the Hot Lap. Thank you very much for anyone liking and subscribing. Comment below if you made it to the end. You are an F1 champion, in my eyes at the very least. And hey, we'll speak to you soon. See you later, Toto. Bye. I know it was here, isn't it? Bye, my friend. Okay, bye.